All right. Let's see, we are live again. All right, back for another one. We're going to talk some more bass fishing. Sorry about the focus there. But, yeah, guys, we got two more seminars, this one, and then we're jumping into kayaks. I think the last one's at 5:30. So, guys, if you got questions, drop them in the comments. Yeah, love to see you down here. Without further ado, let's get this thing rolling.
All right, welcome back everybody to the Alabama Fishing Expo seminar series, and glad for Tucson to be sending these out over the internet for you guys to watch as well. Glenn and I go back a long way. We actually drew each other out in the 90s, 95, 96 at the Florida Invitational in Okeechobee. I think the wind blew about 100 miles.
Ooh, it was bad.
Down about half of what it is now, so everybody was getting stuck. But that was a fun time to fish with Glenn. That's the first time we met. We got him here for you guys now to share some of his bass fishing secrets. So without further ado.
Thank you, appreciate it. Hey guys, Glenn Cappelear, live in Atlanta, Georgia, grew up in Greenville, South Carolina. So for all you Alabama fans, I'm a Clemson graduate. So I just want to let everybody know, y'all might be tuning me out right now, but I'm not a Georgia fan. So there you go. Hey, what I'd like to talk about today is springtime bass fishing and sort of my approach to fishing this time of year. It seems like we have a cold front about every 2 to 3 days with rain, and so it'll really challenge you on how you're setting up your boat or your equipment to fish, in a tournament or just fun fishing. I was in Alabama Wednesday fishing in a private lake, cold frontal system. I'm a typical bass fisherman. I want to start with my excuses first. Full moon, high pressure, bluebird skies, north wind. And so didn't catch a lot of fish, but had a great time on the water. And I learned a lot that day. Usually when I'm approaching a body of water, I'll try to determine what type of mood the fish are in. I hope they're in aggressive, chasing mood because it sort of fits my personality. I like to go, go, go. And so I usually begin fishing with a search bait. That day, and this time of year, I'm throwing a braided, vibrating swimming jig, and usually I'm covering a lot of water when I'm doing this. This is the Strike Kings version, along with the trailer also. I like about a 3/8 ounce to ½ ounce, depending on how fast I want to retrieve the lure. My combination I have it set up on is a 7-foot medium heavy Lew's fishing rod and reel combination. I like the 8:3 gear ratio, but I also will go down to a 6:1 because that cold water, the fish may not be as active. And I was in muddy water, and so I like a chartreuse and white when I'm in muddy water. How about some of you guys? What's some of your favorite springtime lures you like to use? June bug all year, okay. So you know what to get him for Father's Day? Anything June bug, okay. Do you have a favorite lure?
Devil's horse.
A devil's horse, yeah. That was my dad's favorite lure when we'd go fishing in the summertime, for sure. So what I usually do is I'll spend 30 minutes to an hour throwing this kind of bait. And what I'm looking for is, are the fish aggressive? Are they chasing it? Are they hitting it very hard? One thing you have to keep in mind, we're just coming off of a full moon, so there's a wave of fish that have spawned. They may just hit at your lure. I felt like I missed several fish on Wednesday. They were just hitting it. They weren't eating it, they were just knocking. I came by where they were spawning, and so if you're like, man, I missed a fish, then you want to go back and throw another lure in that same area, or make multiple casts with this lure. So what I did is we had fished maybe 10 minutes and caught a 2-pounder. So I was like, okay, that's pretty good. And then we continued up the side of the bank and didn't catch many more. Then we changed on the different side of the bank where the wind was blowing and picked up several fish. So I stayed with a moving bait because they were responding. Probably every 5 to 7 minutes we would catch a fish. So that told me to stay with a bait that's moving. I'm covering water, and I'm going to throw it till my arm gets too tired. So to recap what I talked about is I'm using a moving bait to determine if the fish are aggressive and do they want to chase. What that helps you do, it also helps you eliminate water because you can fish faster, cover more water. You can fish different depths with this type of lure also. Where we were, there was grass from the edge of the water out to about 2.5 feet. And so when I felt like I was watching my graph, when I felt like I got to that depth, then I would slow this down so that it would go deeper, and hopefully coming by a stump or rocks or things like that. Any questions about a...
So you cast that and pull it back? What kind of action do you use?
So if I'm around the grass and it fouls, which means it stops vibrating, I'll snatch the rod, try to snatch the grass free, and oftentimes that causes the fish to bite because he's tracking it, that fish is following it, and then it does something real quick or erratic, and sometimes that causes the fish to bite. And if you hit something with it, you feel like a tree or something, then I would lift my rod up to come over that and let it fall down. So one of my favorite, and another favorite springtime bait would be a spinner bait. Again, covering water, lots of flash, and you can really catch a big fish shallow this time of year. So that's how I do that. I usually use 15 to 20 pound fluorocarbon line, depending on the cover. If I'm fishing grass and it's muddy, you can get away with heavier line, especially if you think you're in a lake that has really big fish, or you're in a spawning area or a big flat, or there's isolated cover, stumps and things like that, where you would think a fish may be spawning around a boat dock. So one of my favorite springtime lures to determine what type of mood the fish are in. So now if I have fished that long and not had any bites, I fished an hour, and if I was on a reservoir and I changed a few locations, then I may change my presentation. The fish are telling me something. Hey, we don't want to chase that stuff. If you visualize this is a stump in the water, and if the fish is sort of spawning here or using this as ambush or using this as cover, how far is that fish willing to swim away from this to feed? If the fish is active, he may not even be on that piece of structure. He just could be in the area. So does the fish have a 2-foot strike zone? Hey, he's only going to swim by if it's not a lot of effort. Because see, they're trying to survive. They're not trying to burn a whole bunch of energy to eat. Or is that fish, 4 or 5 feet coming away from cover? So pay attention when you get a bite by a piece of cover, how close were you to it? And that'll sort of give you also, clue you into what type of mood the fish are in. So if I had tried that and I didn't get a lot of action, then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up a jig. This is a Strike King structure jig, 1/2 ounce. I like a 1/2 or 3/8. And if I'm in muddy water, my rule of thumb when I'm using plastics is the darker the water, the darker the bait. So June bug would be perfect in muddy water, black and blue. But if it's a little bit more clear water, I'm going to go to a green pumpkin. I've got these Strike King Rage Tails, so I'd go to a green color if the water's clear. So that's just a little rule of thumb. The darker the water, the darker the bait.
Somebody told me that recently, and I was like, that seems unintuitive.
Well, it gives a fish can pick it up easier with their vision because it's got a darker background or silhouette. Now, on this type lure, the jig has the body with the head and the weed guard, and then I would put a trailer on the back. Now, this is the craziest name for a lure. It's called a Space Monkey. It's a Strike King product. I like it because it's got several appendages. It has arms, it has legs, and it has a tail or claws. And so when you come over something, it flutters down. That's what I like about it. When we were fishing Wednesday, again, in Alabama, cold frontal conditions, muddy water. Water was 64 degrees. It had been cold that night. I think it was 46 overnight, so the water dropped about 4 or 5 degrees in temperature. Because I found some 68 to 70 degree temperature later that day in pockets protected from the wind. So I surmise full moon, fish should be shallow. It's getting close to 70 degrees. I need to be fishing shallow or fishing areas where fish would spawn. So how I would use this bait, I would use the same rod, the 7 foot, medium heavy. It's very versatile. I use this rod a lot. I'd use it for top water. I'd use it for big spinnerbait, open water fishing, jigs, big worm and brush fishing like that, and 15 to 20 pound fluorocarbon line. And so what I would do, we had made a round with the thunder chicken in this area. And I said, let's go back and fish some isolated cover. The fish is not in a chasing mood. He's like, make me bite. I'm living right here. I'm not going to chase anything. And so we started isolating cover, and I would pitch the jig to that cover, and I'd let it. When you're fishing with plastics or where you're looking for a feel of a bite, unlike a swimming bait where they're going to attack it, what I'll do, I'll pitch it out there, and I keep my rod at about 10 o'clock. And then I hold my reel with my palm of my hand, and I keep my finger, the line right on top of my finger. So I'm doing that. That's how I like to fish. And then I'm hopping it, take up a little slack, hopping it again. And I want to make sure this lure comes over that piece of structure. And what we were fishing was a few laydowns. The tree was maybe 10 foot long, and so I would make multiple casts, because if there was a fish on there, where was he? Was the fish on the end where it was just sticking out of the water, just suspended? Was he halfway down the log, or was he at the base spawning? And so I'd get to that tree, I'd pitch it up at the front, hop it, I'd pitch it in there again, middle part of that tree, hopping it, coming over the tree, and then if I had not had a bite at that point, I'm like, okay, either he's not there or he's where I'm throwing the last time. And so I'm hopping it there. What I would also do this time of year, if you have forward-facing sonar that you can see in front of the boat, you could see a stump before you get to it, see a rock pile, see some debris. This time of year, this March full moon, April full moon, man, I'm really looking for cover where a fish could spawn. And so when you're in those shallow areas or in the back of a pocket, you'll see isolated stump. You'll see a dark spot. Make sure you pitch past that. If I'm in shallow water, I like a 3/8 ounce jig. Now, a couple things I'll do with my jig is I'll spread the brush guard out if I'm in heavy cover where I could, if your lure falls over, that's a lot of times when you get hung. And then if I'm in open water, like Kentucky Lake where I'm on a ledge, probably not going to get hung, I would trim some of this brush guard. And then I put a little angle on it also. If I'm in shallow water, I like a 3/8. If it's windy or it's deeper than 5 foot, I'm going to go to a 1/2 ounce. If you're going heavier with this or the spinnerbait or the bladed jig, you have more control casting, especially if it's windy. Or if you're trying to make a precise presentation to a stump, to a piece of cover, things like that. All right, how about a question about jig fishing or sort of how I'm sort of working through my day? You got a question on that? Either I'm a really good presenter or you guys are hungry, you're ready to go.
So as you go through your day, are you using the jig all day, or just if you don't think they're moving, that's when you use it?
Yeah, so on the deck of the boat, I would have a moving bait. I would have a bait where I can make a very precise presentation, because as you're going down the bank, you'll see a blowdown, or you'll see a dock, or you'll see some piece of structure or a boat ramp, and where you're wanting to make multiple casts. Because sometimes you could throw this bait in a blowdown and the fish not bite, and you turn around, throw this in there, and he bit.
What was that one called?
This is a Strike King's Thunder Chicken is what it's called.
Thunder chicken?
It's a bladed jig is the classification.
Okay.
We were fishing the Bassmasters event on Lake Martin years ago, and they were biting a spinnerbait very well. So it fits my personality, I like to go, 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 cover water. And I'd gone down this bank and I'd caught several smaller fish that just sort of pulled up to spawn. And I got to this one blowdown, and I threw in there 4 times. I said, man, there ought to be a fish in there. My co-angler says to me, you mind if I throw in there? I'm like, no, man, no problem. I've already thrown in there 4 times. If he was going to bite, he would have bitten the spinnerbait. He pitches a jig in there, sets a 5-pounder, makes a cut on the co-angler side. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've never forgotten that all my life. And
Now, when you say blowout, what do you?
a tree, a blowdown, where a tree had blown in the water.
It was blown down in the water.
And so it was just crazy how I had thrown in there. And so that fish proved to me, hey, he did not want to chase that day. He was just going to stay there, and he had to make a real close presentation for that fish to bite. Now, so you've hit all your favorite spots, you've thrown your favorite lure, and you're like, they're not biting. What am I going to do? You're feeling the pressure. You got your buddies with you. You got your kids with you. You got your kid's friend with you, and you're feeling the pressure. What bait am I going to throw? So at some point during your fishing day, there's going to be a biorhythm, an activity period up and down. You see it, you know, Google it and see that kind of stuff. When's the best time to fish or hunt? And so if I had made a pass down a bank that I felt like should have had some fish, it looked great, I could see some bait fish, what am I going to go to? I've tried moving baits. I've tried a jig to make precise presentation. So I go to the bait that for years I would not throw. Anybody know what this bait is?
Wacky worm.
That's the color. That's the presentation. Some people would call it a stick bait. Cinco, ace, yep. Wacky worm. Now the wacky is the presentation, how I have it rigged. I could rig it Texas also. This is the most deadliest pond bait there is. The fish just can't stand it. Now if you're pond fishing and or reservoir fishing with this type bait, you have to watch your line because the fish will just suck it in and you won't even know he's got it. And he swallowed it. And you just killed that fish or, you know, whatever. And so what I do if I'm fishing this is really good in grass. This would have been good when I was fishing Wednesday, except it was really muddy and I didn't have a lot of confidence and the wind was blowing a little too much. But if I'm fishing where I feel like the fish have spawned and they're coming back out, they're guarding fry, very, very deadly. So again, I'd have probably a 6-8 foot rod, a 6-10 foot rod. You could use this is a 7-foot rod. And I'm usually using 12 to 15 pound fluorocarbon on this. Now I've got a really big hook. I don't always use a 5/0 hook. Again, it depends on the cover, what size fish I feel like I'm catching. For years I would not throw this bait because I was like, that's not a bait, that's an ink pen. Doesn't it look like an ink pen? I mean, come on. What? It has no action. What's going on? So I was on Santee Cooper fishing the FLW Everstart event, and it was lily pads through the whole area I was fishing. I was fishing shallow. And there were open areas, or what you would call a hole, like the biggest this little area right here. And you would think, hey, I bet there could be some fish in there. So as I'm going, I see some little fry in those openings. And what I found out was there was about a 3-pounder guarding those fry, the male fish guarding them. And so I rigged up my wacky worm, and I'd throw past that hole, work it up, and let it fall down in there. And you better hold on. They would not hit the spinnerbait, they would not hit the jig, because they're just defending those fry. And when this came in as a slow presentation, just sinking, now it's going to sink like this, but as it sinks, it quivers. It is the fish catching this bait, golly bum, that I've ever used when the fish are not chasing. Another way to use this bait is Texas rig it. And you can also put a small weight just like this. So now I've got it Texas rigged. What I like about the Texas rig is it's weedless. And this bait will skip like a rock. You can sidearm it. Of course, it works really well with a spinning rod, but if you can skip with a bait caster, man, it'll go right up under a dock, under a pontoon boat, under a whooping willow tree. If I am sight fishing, or if I can't see the fish, but I feel like where they should be, like if you're fishing Lake Wise and there's a dock with piers, usually the fish is going to be on the, second or third pier coming off the bank, spawning in about 2 to 3 feet of water. And so I would make sure, man, I'm pitching this right there on that column and letting it fall. If I don't get a bite, I'm going to reel it up to the next column, let it fall, because it just quivers as it falls. Very, very deadly presentation. This bait has caught a bunch of fish. That day on Santee, I caught a limit. It was about 16 pounds. It was a tough tournament. It was late April, so there had been 2 spawns. There had been a March spawn and an April spawn, and the fish were really set up in those holes in those lily pads. If you have that scenario in a farm pond, lily pads, and you see a hole, that's where you want to throw this. So how about a question about the stick bait?
You had one color on, what would it be?
The lure manufacturers do not like that question. They want you to have all. It's hard to beat green pumpkin. It depends on the color. If I'm in real clear water, like a Lake Martin, Lake Lanier, Lake Hartwell, I'd go to a watermelon red, something a little less bold, especially if you're fishing during the spawn, when the fish are up shallow. But probably if you went in my boat, you'd see June bug, you'd see green pumpkin, you'd see watermelon red flake. I've got some bubble gum ones. Alex, you like to throw bubble
I
gum?
was about to say bubble gum.
You know,
I was fishing on Lake Fork, it's like nothing else would work, and the bubble gum started hitting me,
you can see it for a mile.
Yeah.
I tell you, another good bubble gum bait to throw is a shad color bait. When we fish, usually New York, Lake Champlain, where it's crystal clear water, if a fish misses like your top water bait, then man, you fire that pink fluke or that Cinco or Ace, whatever stick bait you're throwing, and you can see it, and when it disappears, well, he's got it. So I have a friend that loves to throw a pink minnow bait, soft plastic, in the springtime after the spawn. You can see it. Remember the day we all used to throw floating worms? I mean, who even throws floating worms anymore? But how deadly that was, bubble gum, methylate. Boy, I remember the day we used to throw that all the time. But anyway, this is a very effective bait. So what I have shown you is sort of how I break down a body of water, what type of mood the fish are in. I'm throwing a moving bait. Again, now my father, who's in heaven now, would disagree. He's a worm dragger. And you guys a worm dragger, you don't care nothing about his moderate, you just want to drag something on the bottom. And that's who he was. And then y'all pointing at each other, yeah. And so there were times when I would beat him because they were chasing. My father-in-law, who pond fished all his life in South Georgia, he wanted to throw a red shad worm. That was his favorite color to throw. And if the fish were not chasing, he'd beat me. But if they were chasing a spinnerbait, I'd put it on him. And so that's just something to consider. If you're not getting bit and you're throwing something that should be working, you need to change up. And that's hard to do because we're secure with our colors and what we like to throw. But that's how you become a more effective angler, is making changes and stuff. So how about a question? Rod, reel setup, lure, line, any of that?
So, yeah, line. I see you don't have a weight on there. You're throwing 15 pound. You said, what, 12 to 15 pounds on the line?
Right, if I'm in open water. Now, this bait's pretty heavy, and that's a big hook. And so, you know, I could throw it very well. Again, where I was Wednesday, it had shallow grass. If it had been more clear and not windy, then this bait with a 64th ounce screw-in weight would be deadly. If you're fishing an area where you feel like they're spawning, or you don't want your bait to get, you wouldn't throw this jig because you're going to get hung up in all the grass. But throw this with a 64th ounce weight. And you could go to a 1/8 if you need to have a little more feel to it. But that's a very good. I know Jay Yellis, a friend of mine, throws a Cinco with a 1/8 ounce tungsten weight religiously. Loves throwing that bait. But again, I like a 6.5 to 7 foot rod, medium heavy. And this, a lot of times, is a backup bait. So if I see a fish move, or if he misses my lure, or I'm throwing that swimming jig and I see the fish roll on it and he missed it because he was not trying to eat it. He was trying to get it away from where the fish was spawning, and that's when you throw this back in there, right back in where you just missed it. Or if he misses it again, this is the bait you want to throw. So. Now, another bait I like to throw in the springtime, especially in Alabama, y'all have got a lot of shallow lakes with grass, with stumps, is a swim jig. Usually when the fish first pull up in March, if you get a couple of warm days, it's almost like the spinnerbait, it's almost like the bladed jig, but it's not as intrusive. It's just swimming, it's not vibrating. You could put a swimming tail on the back, you could put a chunk on the back. This type bait, especially up until May when the fish are, when the shad are spawning, is deadly because they're eating minnows at that time of year, they're eating shad, and so this is a bait that you can throw around. It's pretty weedless, and you just swim it back. You can hop it, make it do different stuff. Very deadly, a swim jig. Very, very popular bait in Alabama. The trailers I was showing you, Rage Tail, I like it because it's very slender, it's not too bulky, doesn't make my jig too big, and if you're just Texas rigging this kind of bait, then it would penetrate the grass easier, falls more true. You can pull the appendages off if it's too much. You can bite half of it off if you don't want it so long. But I really like this bait. And if I were sight fishing, I would use a white color or bubble gum so you can see it this time of year too. So probably my favorite trailer to put on a jig or Texas rig.
It's called Rage Tail?
It is, Rage Tail, made by Strike King.
I think I have some of those, but I've never had any success with them. Go back to the worms.
Well, yeah. Well, we revert back to what we're confident in. This is the Ace that I was telling you about. And you can also, and I've got one rigged up in here. Now this will save you because you can catch about 3 fish on one of these and it tears up. And so I have a little O-ring on there, and that's where I put my hook through. So the hook is not tearing up the plastic body. It's hooked to that. Now, some people will use a larger size split ring, like you'd have on a crankbait, because it's heavier, and they just slide it up the tail and put it right in the middle. And y'all can come look at this when we wrap it up here. That's just another way you won't use as many baits. And this is watermelon red flake. So. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Midsummer, lower, Alabama River. If you was jig fishing, would you be deep water in the river or shallow water?
All right, for my audience that's listening, the question was, midsummer, probably pretty warm, June, July, would you fish the deeper end? Shallow water or deep water? Is there any current? There is current. Well, you can stay shallow if there's current. And if it's cool water getting discharged from a dam, if the water's cooler, in the river you may have less pressure. Also, during times of day, they would pull up to the cover to feed different times. And it depends on if there's a lot of traffic in the river, because there's only so many blowdowns, there's only so many oxbows. I may base that on, am I fishing during the week when there's not as much pressure, and if I see a bunch of boats in that area. And then just see what's going on. That current sort of cancels out a bunch of stuff. And so if you've got that current, then it positions the fish and you know where to throw. And then the little eddy behind the blowdown, behind the stump, around the rocks. So, good question though. Favorite Alabama lake? Ooh, y'all got some good ones. Guntersville is really, really strong. I've had some good tournaments there in my career. But I like Lake Weiss. Man, there's times when it's just on fire. And then, of course, Logan Martin, Neely Henry, they're outstanding. The lake I've struggled the most on in Alabama is Smith Lake in Jasper. Early on in my career, the fish, I bombed some tournaments up there because I really couldn't understand the fish were suspended, and I was trying to catch them on the bottom, and it wasn't working. I bombed a tournament, and then later on in my career, I made adjustments, realized the fish were suspended the time of year we were there, and so I went to more presentation with the jerk bait, swim bait presentation. So really fell in love with Jasper, Alabama, and some people up there, and that's probably been one of my top 5 lakes I like to fish. So, good. Thanks, guys. Hey, I'll be around.
Where do you like it on Guntersville?
Where do I like it on Guntersville? Somewhere within a couple of miles of Mid-Lake. I know south of the B.B. Comer Bridge, but then I like Spring Creek. It just depends on what time of year. I had a friend there this week that was really catching them in about 5 foot of water.
Really? I didn't do well at all this week.
Yeah, he's got pictures on his Facebook page. You can see the big fish. He had forward-facing sonar and found them in some grass patches.
Oh, okay.
Is what helped. So
I don't have that yet.
it's a game changer.
Is it?
That's for sure. Yeah.
I'll have to get that.
Yeah. Well, great, guys. You can follow me on Facebook. Sportsman's Outreach is my outdoor ministry, or you can follow me on Glenn Cappelear, or shoot me a question, send me a message, a messenger. Love to help you fish and learn more about fishing. So thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Alex, y'all can clap because I'm on live. Oh, yeah.
All right, guys. So we got one more coming up at 5:30. A little kayak discussion and shallow water fishing, which really applies to everybody. But all right. If you still want to make it down here, so the show is open till 7 tonight and open till 7 tomorrow. It'll start at 10 a.m. We'll be doing the seminars just like this. Got a good lineup. I've got a link I posted in the description. You can check that out if you want to know what the schedule is for who's doing what seminars. So jump on there. But yeah, I think from what I'm hearing, there's a second wave of folks really jumping in here. So if you're getting off work, whatever you're doing, get on down here to the venue. So it's been a good show so far. We're looking forward to it. I think boats should be in the water tomorrow. We're gonna have a sign up process with that. Obviously the weather is going to dictate a lot of that kind of stuff. We're certainly not going to get out there if it's too nasty, but we'll have bass, cat, falcon, and a skeeter in the water. You come on down here, tackle, everything's 10% off when you walk in the booth, and then there's some other specials going on once you get in the booth. So come say hey, plan on coming. If you're not making it tonight, then come on down tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. But we've got one more seminar coming up at 5:30. I'll be back on with that.